I'm Jhon Croft, and I'm talking about the way in which the win-lose world is in fact destroying us and destroying the underpinnings and the life support systems on which we all depend. You see, the win-lose games that we have built into our culture, in education, in health, in the legal system, in government, and in the economy, are based on the idea that there are winners and losers. And the fact that there are winners and losers means that there's a certain segment of the population that is considered expendable, that is considered, that is blamed for their own condition. And this blame the victim mentality, that is the dominant mentality that keeps the win-lose game in place, is ultimately responsible for the problems that we're having worldwide at the moment. You see, in education, the hierarchical organisation of the education system itself, in very important ways, is preventing education happening for certain groups of people within the schools. And so what happens within schools, we have successes and we have failures, and the failures are blamed for their failure. The same thing happens in hospitals. The hierarchical organisation of the hospital itself in some ways perpetuates ill health, the growth of iatrogenic illnesses. You know, these sorts of things are symptoms of the fact that the win-lose game that is being played within the hospital is in fact producing ill health. If you look at the life expectancy of doctors in hospitals, it's horrific because of the stress that they're working under. And stress-related illnesses are the fastest growing illnesses we have. We have a legal system in which if you increase the spending on police and policing, it actually increases the crime rate. You know, for example, in the United States, where they still have the death penalty, it's been shown on the basis of DNA evidence that 10% of those people who are executed for crimes are innocent of the crimes that they've been executed for. This is a justice system that is in fact perpetuating injustice. And we have a worldwide economy at the moment, you know, an economy that's worldwide, that in fact cannot economize. The system is based on debt, not based on savings. And if we were to pay all the debts on the planet as a whole, we'd have no money left. And in fact, we'd still be in debt because we haven't paid the interest. So these are win-lose games in which losing is a built-in part of the game itself. Now, these win-lose games survive by keeping the loss, by keeping the fact that they're self-contradictory hidden. If we can make the contradictions within these systems visible, that creates a space in which we can innovate and change. Because when the contradiction becomes invisible, that's invisible becomes visible, people realise, hey, look, we need to change our systems of education. We need to change our systems of health. We need to change our legal systems or our governments or the economy as a whole. And this is what we need to do, because this free space is the place in which change can occur. Now, how can we build these changes? And one of the problems that we have at the moment is that we demonise the hierarchies for perpetuating the injustices that we see. But what we need to recognise is that within every corporation, within every government system, there is already a range of opinions. And in fact, the range of opinions, even within corporations like Monsanto, that's doing so much damage around the world at the moment, that within Monsanto itself, there's a range of opinions that is as great as the range of opinions within the community as a whole. And if we demonise these organisations, what we are doing is we are weakening the position of potential allies within these organisations and corporations and governments. And we are in fact strengthening the position of those people who we would recognise as psychopathic or sociopathic, and in fact working against the interests of building a sustainable world in the Great Turning. What we need to do is to be able to identify who are our natural allies within those organisations and go to those people and say, we see you. We celebrate you for the changes you're trying to bring within those governments, within those organisations. And we need to ask a generative question, and the generative question is, how can we support your work? how can we support you to bring about change within those organisations so that they actually live up to the goals and objectives that they claim that they're working for, that they live up to producing education for everybody, or bringing health to the total community, or dealing with the problems of injustice. If we can identify who those people are and work with them, then we can bring about change. Now, the way in which we do this is absolutely crucial. The way in which we do this is we build around the missing fifth sector of our socio-political and economic systems. You see, classic capitalism was based around two things. It was based around private ownership of the means of production, distribution and exchange, and it was built around using a free market mechanism for the allocation of scarce resources. And that produces four different kinds of economy. It produces a privately owned system or a community-owned system. And it produces a private market system or a system that is in fact designed through collective planning. Now, big corporations work through collective planning. They aim to maximise the profits for shareholders in their corporations. And so what we've got is four different kinds of enterprise. And if you look at the history of the last 200 years, we find that each time we get through an economic crisis, it's through identifying another segment of the economy and adding that to the mix. So that the first thing that happened was that during the 1870s, the crisis that happened then saw the growth of big industrial cartels. People moved from small to medium enterprises into big corporations. And so from the 1870s, we had an economy that was a mix of two different kinds: big industrial cartels and small to medium enterprise. That began to come apart in the 1930s. And during the 1930s, we saw the growth of the corporate state. We saw the growth of fascist economies in which the government began to play a major role in the economy, and the growth of government enterprises. And so we had a three-tier mix of a mixed economy during the 1940s that saw the growth of the biggest economic boom that the world has ever seen, from the end of the Second World War until the 1970s. In the 1970s, that three-tier mixed economy of government, big business corporations and small to medium enterprises began to come unravelled. And what we saw was the addition of a fourth sector. The fourth sector was the growth of non-government enterprises. And the non-government organisation sector has boomed since the 1970s worldwide, so that is now the fourth sector of our economy. Now, what we're missing at the moment is a fifth sector. And the fifth sector I call community enterprise strategic partnerships. You see, the big problems we have today of resource depletion, of climate change, of economic crisis cannot be solved by any one of those four sectors. It cannot be solved by the not-for-profits. It cannot be solved by non-government organisations. It cannot be solved by government enterprises. It cannot be solved by big business corporations, and it cannot be solved by small to medium enterprises. But if we bring those four together in a community enterprise strategic partnerships, together they have the resources that can solve these problems. And that's what we need to do. We need to build a win-win in which all four sectors of the economy come together. And out of building a win-win, not a win-lose, a win-win in which all four sectors work creatively and constructively together, we can solve the problems of climate change. We can solve the problems of resource depletion. We can solve the problems of extinction and biodiversity, loss of biodiversity. But we need to do it collectively and creatively, and stimulating the liberation of a collective intelligence among these organisations. A collective intelligence that's not based on collective stupidity of win-lose games. Because that's what's happening at the moment. We're playing a collective stupidity. We cannot depend on corporations for these answers. We cannot depend on governments for these answers. They are the very things that created the problems in the first place. We need a different way of thinking. And this is what Dragon Dreaming helps to provide. Dragon Dreaming helps to liberate this collective intelligence through people coming together in partnership to create problem-solving projects that make a difference at the level of local communities. Big projects grow out of successful little projects, and by stimulating the creativity of these little projects, we can find the answers.